Jake Morgan lived in his truck, delivering goods across the country, invisible to the world. One night, he made a mistake, parking where he shouldn't. The next morning, the CEO showed up, ready to punish him. But what happened next changed both their lives forever. The night was cold, biting, the kind of cold that slipped through the seams of even the thickest jackets. Jake Morgan sat alone in the cab of his semi-truck, engine off, breath fogging the air as it hit the glass. Outside, the world was silent except for the occasional gust of wind rattling loose metal somewhere beyond the warehouse walls. He'd just finished unloading a shipment of industrial equipment. Another job done without fanfare. Another delivery that would help keep the gears of commerce turning. He rubbed his face with both hands, then stared out at the empty parking lot stretching before him like a forgotten stretch of highway. No one else was around. The warehouse doors were sealed shut, the facility locked down for the night. Most drivers had motels to go to, or company housing if they were lucky. Not Jake. His motel budget had run dry weeks ago. Sleeping in the truck wasn't new, it was home now, such as it was. Jake reached behind the seat and pulled out a faded photo tucked into an old glove compartment. It showed a younger version of himself, arms slung over his wife's shoulder, standing in front of their house. A real house, not some roadside parking lot. Beside them stood their teenage son, smiling wide, eyes full of promise. That was years ago, before cancer took her, before grief drove a wedge between father and son, before Jake became a ghost on the road, surviving more than living. He slid the photo back into place and leaned his head against the seat, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy anymore. Every creak of the truck, every distant sound, felt like a warning. But tonight, he needed rest. Tomorrow meant another early start, another long haul across state lines. As his breathing slowed and his body finally gave in to exhaustion, the silence outside held steady, until it didn't. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, hitting the windshield like a spotlight. Jake stirred, groggy, confused. Then the driver's side door yanked open, the cold rushing in like a slap. Out. Now. Jake blinked up into the harsh glare of a flashlight, shielding his eyes. Standing there was a man in a tailored suit, flanked by 2 security guards. Behind them, a sleek sedan idled under the pale glow of the overhead lights. Jake squinted, trying to make sense of what was happening. "I said move," the man repeated, voice sharp, impatient. Jake grabbed his jacket and stepped out, shivering instantly. He looked at the man again, this time recognizing the logo stitched onto the lapel of his coat, Reeves Global Transport. And suddenly, he knew exactly who he was looking at. Miles Reeves, CEO. Jake had seen his face on internal memos and corporate posters pinned inside the loading docks. He was supposed to be inspirational, proof that hard work led to success. But right now, Miles looked less like a visionary leader and more like a man who'd caught someone trespassing. "You have 5 seconds to explain why I shouldn't call the police," Miles said, arms crossed, jaw tight. Jake exhaled slowly, rubbing his arms for warmth. "I'm just waiting for daylight to pick up my next load." Miles narrowed his eyes. "You know this is private property." Jake nodded. "I do. But I don't got anywhere else to be." Something in his tone caught Miles off guard. Not defiance, not disrespect, but something quieter. Weariness, defeat. "You're a driver?" "Yeah." "What company?" Jake hesitated. "Independent contractor." Miles glanced at the truck. "No company plates." "I've been subcontracting for Reeves for the last 3 months," Jake said. "Been running deliveries cross-state. Always on time." Miles studied him for a long moment. "And yet here you are, breaking policy." Jake shrugged. "Didn't see another way." Miles turned to the guards. "Take him inside." Jake stiffened. "For what?" "For answers." They walked across the lot, the crunch of gravel beneath their boots the only sound. Inside the warehouse, the air was warmer, but sterile. Rows upon rows of crates stretched into the distance. A few workers lingered near the break room, watching curiously as the CEO led a disheveled trucker past them. Inside, Miles motioned for Jake to sit. He did cautiously. Miles remained standing. "Tell me your name." "Jake Morgan." "Veteran." Jake blinked. "How'd you know?" "You walk like one. You carry yourself like one. And you've got that look." Jake didn't ask what look that was. Miles sat across from him now, elbows on the table. You think I don't know how this system works? Truckers get paid per mile, not per hour. Wait times are unpaid. Motel costs come out of pocket. And if you fall behind schedule, the fines pile up. Jake raised an eyebrow. So you do know. I read reports, Miles said. But I never thought. I never saw. Jake let out a dry laugh. That's the point, isn't it? We deliver your products. We keep your business moving. But no one sees us unless we mess up. Miles didn't respond right away. He studied Jake, the worn jacket, the tired eyes, the faint tremble in his hands when he shifted in his seat. What happened to you? He asked quietly. Jake hesitated. Then, slowly, he began to speak. And so the night unfolded. Not with punishment, but with truth. One man with power. One man with nothing left to lose. And a moment neither of them expected. A beginning. Jake's voice was rough, like gravel under a tire. Not from yelling no, he hadn't raised it once, but from years of swallowing words that should have been spoken long ago. He sat at the break room table, hands clasped in front of him like a soldier bracing for orders. Across from him, Miles Reeves leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes unreadable. Jake had started with the basics. His name, his service record, 20 years in the army, most of them overseas. Then came civilian life, the transition that wasn't a transition at all. No clear mission, no comrades watching his back. Just silence and debt and the slow unraveling of everything he thought he'd built. I met my wife when I got out, Jake said, staring at the chipped surface of the table. We bought a house, had a kid. For a while, it felt like we were going to be okay. Miles didn't speak. He just listened. She got sick, Jake continued. Cancer. Fast. Aggressive. We fought it. We did everything they told us to do. Chemo, radiation, experimental drugs. Took everything. Our savings. Our peace. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to keep going. My son, he tried to hold it together. But I didn't know how to be a dad anymore. I'd lost too much. Every time I looked at him, I saw her. And I hated myself for not being able to protect either of them. Jake exhaled slowly, shaking his head. So I pulled away, pushed him out, told him I needed space, told myself I was doing the right thing. Maybe I believed it for a while. Miles shifted in his seat, but still said nothing. Lost the house, Jake went on. Couldn't afford the payments after medical bills. Lost my job because I kept calling in to sit with her. When she passed, I just kept driving. He looked up then, straight into Miles' eyes. You want to know why I sleep in my truck? Because I don't have anywhere else. Because I'm used to it. Because if I stop moving, I remember what I lost. Miles finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You could have asked for help. Jake gave a short, bitter laugh. Help? From who? The company. Jake shook his head. You think someone like me walks into an office and says, Hey boss, I'm barely holding it together. Can you spare some compassion? You think that gets you anything but a pink slip? Miles didn't answer. Jake sat back, arms crossed now. I don't expect pity. Hell, I don't even want it. But I'm not invisible, Mr. Reeves. I just wanted to get through the night without breaking another rule. Miles studied him again, this time longer, deeper. Then he stood abruptly. Come with me. Jake blinked. Where? To my office. Jake hesitated, then pushed his chair back and followed. They walked through the warehouse in silence. The place was quiet now, save for the occasional forklift humming in the distance. A few workers glanced their way but quickly turned back to work when they caught sight of the CEO. Inside the office, Miles locked the door behind them. The space was sleek, minimalist, glass walls, leather chairs, framed certificates on the wall. Jake felt out of place the moment he stepped inside. Miles walked around his desk and sat down, rubbing his temples. You're not the first driver who's struggled, he said finally. But you might be the first one who actually talked to me. Jake shrugged. Didn't have much choice. Miles looked up sharply. You always have a choice. Jake stared at him for a beat. Maybe. Or maybe people just stop seeing options when they're too tired to look. Silence filled the room again. Then Miles stood and walked over to a small cabinet, pulling out 2 mugs and a tin of tea leaves. You drink tea? He asked. Jake gave a half smile. Tonight? Yeah. Miles filled the mugs with steaming hot water, letting the fragrant leaves steep before handing one to Jake. They clinked mugs, not in celebration, but in recognition. Jake took a sip, letting the warmth spread through his chest. Miles sat again, swirling his mug gently. My father built this company, he said after a pause. From nothing. He worked 16-hour days, slept on a cot in the warehouse, never took a vacation. When he died, I inherited everything. Jake nodded slowly. Sounds like a tough act to follow. It was. Miles set his mug down. And I made sure to follow it. Exactly. I ran this company the way he would have, cold, efficient, unfeeling. Profit margins mattered more than people. Growth over humanity. Jake didn't interrupt. I read reports about driver conditions, Miles continued. I saw the numbers, turnover rates, complaints, injuries. I knew things were bad, but I didn't see them. Not really. Jake tilted his head. What changed tonight? Miles looked at him, something raw flickering behind his gaze. You did. Jake frowned. Me? You showed me something I stopped looking for. Humanity. Real struggle. Not just data points on a spreadsheet. Jake chuckled dryly. Glad I could be your wake-up call. Miles smiled faintly, then grew serious again. I can't undo what's happened to you, he said. But I can start making changes. Starting here. Starting now. Jake raised an eyebrow. You're saying you'll fix this overnight? No, Miles admitted. But I won't ignore it anymore. Jake leaned back, studying the man across from him. For years, he'd seen CEOs like Miles as untouchable. Figures in suits who signed checks they never earned, who never understood the cost of every mile driven or every hour spent waiting unpaid in a cold parking lot. But tonight, he saw something different. Not guilt, not charity, something closer to responsibility. Jake took another sip of whiskey. All right, he said quietly. Let's see what kind of man you really are. Miles nodded. And in that moment, the air between them shifted not from power to submission, but from distance to connection. One chapter closed. Another was about to begin. The next morning, the warehouse buzzed with an energy that wasn't just about productivity. Word had spread fast. Jake Morgan, the grizzled independent contractor who usually kept to himself, had been seen walking into Miles Reeves' office the night before. Security guards whispered about it over coffee. Forklift operators speculated during their breaks. Drivers gathered near the loading docks, exchanging theories. Some thought Jake was getting fired on the spot. Others guessed he'd stolen something. No one imagined what had really happened. Inside the executive wing of Reeves Global Transport, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The long conference table stretched across the boardroom like a battlefield, flanked by some of the company's top executives. At the head sat Miles, his sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, eyes sharp and unyielding. I want temporary housing for drivers, he said, voice firm. A beat of silence followed. Across from him, Martin Hargrove, the COO, leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Excuse me? Martin asked, as if he hadn't heard correctly. You heard me, Miles replied. Drivers who finish late at night and can't afford motels shouldn't have to sleep in their trucks. We're rolling out a dormitory-style facility starting at this location. Martin blinked. Sir, we've discussed overnight rest areas before, but this is sudden. And expensive. Miles didn't flinch. We'll budget for it. And how do you propose we fund this initiative? Chimed in Karen Ritchie, VP of Operations. Our margins are already tight. If we start diverting funds to housing, we'll be cutting corners elsewhere. Miles looked around the table, scanning each face. These were smart people. Competent. Efficient. But they weren't seeing the bigger picture yet. This isn't charity, he said. It's sustainability. Driver turnover costs us more than any short-term savings. If we provide basic support, we retain talent. We reduce downtime. We improve morale. Karen crossed her arms. Morale doesn't show up on quarterly reports. No, Miles admitted. But attrition does. Absenteeism does. Complaints from drivers who feel undervalued. Those do too. Martin shook his head. You're talking about a cultural shift, not a policy change. Exactly, Miles said. Silence fell again. Then, quietly, from the far end of the table, came a new voice. I think it's worth trying. Everyone turned toward Phoebe Miller, the youngest manager on the team. She was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and known for speaking only when she had something meaningful to say. I've worked in the field, she continued. I've seen drivers waiting for hours to unload. I've watched men and women eat cold meals out of plastic containers because there's no kitchen. Some of them haven't slept in days. We talk about efficiency, but we ignore the human cost. Miles gave her a nod of appreciation. Martin scoffed. So now we're running a shelter? No, Phoebe said. We're finally treating our workforce like more than numbers on a spreadsheet. Karen exhaled sharply. This could set a precedent. Other locations will expect the same. Miles leaned forward. Good. Martin frowned. You're serious about this? I am, Miles said. And I'm not done. He paused, letting the weight settle. We're also launching a veterans reintegration program. Priority hiring for former service members. Mental health support. Job placement. Training. Now the room went completely still. Karen broke the silence first. Are you saying this is because of one man? Miles met her gaze without hesitation. Yes, he said. One man reminded me why I started this company in the first place. Later that afternoon, Jake stood outside the warehouse, leaning against his truck, watching the world move around him. He hadn't expected to hear back so soon, but he hadn't expected anything to come from last night either. Phoebe approached, clipboard in hand. You caused quite the stir, she said with a small smile. Jake raised an eyebrow. Is that right? She nodded. Housing. Support programs. You wouldn't believe the looks on some of their faces. Jake chuckled. Bet they didn't see that coming. Nope, she said. But someone did. Jake tilted his head. Miles? Yeah, he's actually pushing through with it. Slowly, but surely. Jake looked away, staring at the horizon where the sky met pavement. I didn't come here looking to start a revolution, he muttered. Phoebe stepped closer. Maybe not, but sometimes revolutions start with one person being honest. Jake let that sink in. Then he turned back to her. What happens now? Phoebe shrugged. That depends. Are you planning on leaving anytime soon? Jake hesitated. He should have said yes. He should have packed up and driven off into the sunrise, just like he always did. But something held him back. No, he admitted. Guess I'm sticking around for a bit. Phoebe smiled. Good, because things are about to get interesting. Back inside the CEO's office, Miles sat alone, staring out the window at the parking lot below. He watched Jake talking to Phoebe, two very different people standing side by side. His phone buzzed. An email. Internal memo policy changes effective immediately. Miles opened it, scanned the list, then closed it without comment. He reached for the tea again and took a slow sip. He felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't pressure or success, but a purpose, and he wasn't afraid of it. Rain tapped gently against the windows of the newly built driver's dormitory, a modest but clean two-story building tucked behind the main warehouse. Inside, a handful of truckers sat in the common area, sipping coffee, flipping through donated books, or catching up on sleep before their next haul. The hum of a microwave, the low murmur of conversation, things that once felt foreign to Jake Morgan now sounded like peace. He stood near the doorway, arms crossed, watching it all unfold like something he wasn't sure was real. Phoebe walked over, holding two steaming cups. You're not going to stand there all day, are you? She asked with a smirk. Jake took one of the cups and exhaled into it. Feels weird being part of this. Being part of something good? Phoebe teased. Jake shrugged. I'm used to being invisible. She leaned against the wall beside him. Maybe that's why you see things others don't. Jake didn't answer right away. He looked around again. At the bunk beds lined neatly in rows, at the small kitchenette stocked with supplies, at the bulletin board filled with job postings and mental health resources. It was more than a place to crash. It was a beginning. Inside his office, Miles Reeves stared down at a stack of reports spread across his desk. One was a draft for a company-wide announcement about the Veterans Reintegration Program. Another detailed the projected costs of expanding housing facilities to other warehouses. A third was a handwritten letter from Jake. Miles picked it up and read it again. Miles, you didn't have to do any of this. I know that. I also know what it means when someone does anyway. If you're reading this, I'm probably already gone. But I wanted you to know it matters. What you're doing. It matters. Keep going. And don't let them talk you out of it. Miles set the letter down, rubbing his temples. He'd expected resistance from the board, but he hadn't expected how much it would wear on him. Every step forward came with pushback, budget concerns, legal liabilities, public image risks. But then he remembered Jake's voice the night they met. Not angry, not desperate, just tired, so damn tired. And he remembered his own father's words. A company is only as strong as the people who build it. Miles picked up his phone. Get me the HR director, he said. We move forward with the veteran hiring initiative. No compromises. He hung up and looked out the window again. This time he saw Jake walking toward him. Later that afternoon, Jake sat across from Miles in the same break room where everything had started. The space hadn't changed, but the air between them had. I got your letter, Miles said, sliding it back across the table. Jake nodded. Didn't mean to make it sound like goodbye. You were planning on leaving? Jake hesitated. I thought about it. Miles studied him carefully. Why didn't you? Jake looked away. Because I realized, maybe I still have something left to give. Miles gave a faint smile. That makes two of us. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Miles leaned forward. There's something else, he said. I want you to be part of this. Officially. Jake blinked. What are you saying? I'm creating a new role, driver liaison. Someone who can bridge the gap between management and the people doing the work. Someone who understands both sides. Jake shook his head slowly. I'm not exactly executive material. You're exactly the kind of person we need, Miles corrected. You've lived this life. You've seen the cracks. And now you get to help fix them. Jake didn't answer right away. He looked at the man across from him. Not just a CEO anymore, but someone who had chosen to listen, to act, to change. He took a deep breath. I'll do it, he said. On one condition. Miles raised an eyebrow. Which is? That I don't lose sight of who I am. Miles smiled. Deal. Weeks passed. Then months. Changes rolled out quietly. No press releases, no flashy headlines. But among the drivers, word spread fast. Showers installed in parking areas. Dormitories opening up near major hubs. Veterans offered job placements with mental health support and flexible schedules. At first, some drivers were skeptical. Others hopeful. Most just grateful. Jake became a fixture at the warehouse, moving between offices and loading docks, listening, advocating, helping rebuild trust where it had been broken. One afternoon, as he stood outside the dormitory, a package arrived for him. He opened it carefully, revealing a simple envelope with his name written in handwriting he hadn't seen in years. Inside was a letter. Dad, I heard what you're doing. I guess I should have reached out sooner. Maybe I was waiting for you to come back. Or maybe I needed to believe you could. I don't know if we can fix everything, but I want to try. Let's talk. Love. Adam. Jake held the letter tight, staring out at the horizon. Hope wasn't just a memory. It was something he could drive toward. Back inside the warehouse, Miles watched from a distance as Jake stood alone, reading something. He couldn't see the expression on the older man's face, but he didn't need to. He knew what it meant. Redemption. Forgiveness. A second chance. He turned back to his office, shoulders lighter than they'd been in years. There was still a long road ahead, but they weren't driving it alone. This story makes us reflect on redemption, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to ask for help. What would you do if someone handed you a second chance? Comment below. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to embrace the journey for more powerful stories like this one. See you in the next video.